Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast this week. This week, Jake and I are going to be joined by my sister, Ally, formerly Ironside, now Barlow, and she has a undergraduate degree in civil engineering from LeTourneau University, and then went on to pursue a master's and PhD at Oregon State University, where she met one of our former guests, Zachary Barlow, her husband, now my brother-in-law. Thanks for coming on, Ally.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, so we usually start with education. So I guess maybe start by telling us what you did for your master's and PhD, because that's hard for me to keep straight, and that's the last bit of your education there.
Yeah, great question. So, like you mentioned, I went to LeTourneau University for my undergraduate degree, and I studied civil engineering. I did water and wastewater management mostly. I was kind of on the environmental side of civil engineering, so not buildings, most specifically. And was kind of lost. So then I ended up going to graduate school, and as one does when they're lost. And
that's why we're making a podcast, Ally. You're going to help all those lost souls find out what they want to do sooner.
I'm going to help them. Anyway, so I found a program at Oregon State, which was kind of a unique hybrid, and I was able to do all of my coursework, and my degree is actually in civil engineering for both my master's and PhD, but 100% of my research was engineering education, which is actually its own field. You can get a degree in engineering education at schools like Purdue and Virginia Tech and a couple of other schools around the country.
In so undergraduate degree or just upper
graduate
degrees?
Degree.
Okay.
Good clarification. You can get a master's or a PhD in engineering education. So I liked my degree program because it's kind of offers me some flexibility, and I could still sort of teach at a technical undergraduate university in civil engineering because that's my degree. But I could also, I'm pretty well suited to pursue continued research in engineering education at some of those bigger schools. So, yeah.
Sweet.
Okay. Could you tell us what your master's your thesis and dissertation were on specifically?
Oh, look at you with your terminology.
Yeah, no. I did my research.
Yes, yeah. Thesis and dissertation. So all of my work centered around student engagement. For my master's, kind of feels like a long time ago, even though it wasn't. My master's, I interviewed faculty. So I was talking to engineering faculty who were implementing a survey to try to understand their students' engagement. And I was getting their feedback on that instrument. And so I was sort of looking at that process of how a faculty member takes a new tool like an engagement survey, implements it in their classroom, and what makes it useful. What parts of that do they sort of lean on to, like what would make them want to do it in the first place? What are some barriers? And so I did all of my master's work on that, and I published an article on that. And then for my dissertation, I was looking at that same survey instrument, and I was doing some validation processes on it. And so I had a couple thousand students take the survey, and I did a bunch of stats to sort of make sure those questions or the items on the survey held together in a validated way. And then, so that was one of my dissertation was 3 journal articles. So that was one of my dissertation articles. My second article, I used the instrument I developed and then another instrument that I developed, or that I did not develop, that was already developed, and compared faculty practices to student engagement levels to sort of see if faculty have different practices. Does it correlate to different student engagement levels? I'm not really proving any, I didn't really prove anything. It was kind of sort of a preliminary study in that sense, but just looking at education best practices and how do students respond to those based on their cognitive engagement specifically. And then my last work, which is probably my favorite work, was I did some interviews with a couple of juniors in civil engineering, and I talked about engagement across courses. So previous study I was mentioning was looking at a lot of students and course-specific engagement levels, whereas my last study, I was looking at a single student, a single person, and how their engagement varied across their own courses. And so what kind of caused those peaks in engagement? Was it a good teacher? Was it an interesting subject? And what caused there to be a lack of engagement? And that was my last article.
So
that's really cool.
I was going to say, so with those 3 journal articles, like when you're saying you're measuring student engagement, is that student engagement based just on a survey?
Yeah, good question. So within a lot of engineering education, because it's a new field, is based on like just education literature generally. And so engagement is sort of this well-defined construct within the literature, and there's sort of 3 components. There's behavioral engagement, so it would be, I'm sitting there, I may be taking notes. Those are behaviors that you're actively participating, right? I'm choosing to sort of like do as I'm told, would be behavioral engagement. Then there is emotional engagement, which is like, oh, I don't like this, like I have a negative emotional towards it, or maybe I am excited about it. Those would be kind of like components of emotional engagement. And then finally, there is cognitive engagement, which we call sort of like a latent or an unobservable construct. It's hard for me to tell how hard you're thinking, right?
Right.
You guys were students, and I know for myself,
bad ones
like,
at that.
well, it's interesting because you knew those students who were always taking notes and they were so diligent, and their behavioral engagement was hyper high. They're always attending class. So on sort of all the check boxes, they would have high engagement, but actually a better predictor of how much you're learning is your cognitive engagement. So even though I might look like I'm off daydreaming in the corner, how hard am I really thinking? And so there's kind of an interest within the educational field of how hard are students thinking about the material, how cognitively engaged are they? And so it's kind of an important construct to measure. And so I was looking at how students would report on their own engagement. So basically, how hard would you say you're thinking about the material on a day-to-day basis? And so I would ask a series of questions about both your activities, some of your behavioral engagement components, and some of your cognitive engagement components, ask you to report on those. And then the validation piece is, do you report consistently? Basically, do my questions mean the same thing every time?
Okay.
So if you guys have ever taken a survey, you'll notice they kind of ask the same thing in different ways.
Right.
For a variety of reasons. One, because if people just are clicking through your survey, you don't want it to
throw everything off.
Yes, you want to sort of know that there's like an intentional response and that certain questions all elicit the same response is the idea.
Mm-hmm. So going back to your, like, one of the best indicators maybe is the cognitive engagement. Did you find anything with those students that are really focused on note taking, not necessarily even the material, that sometimes was worse than a student that, like you said, wouldn't be taking any notes, but is strictly thinking about the material they're trying to learn?
Yeah. So my last study, which I was saying was the most interesting to me, I was looking at sort of highly engaged students, or high achieving students is how I would characterize them. So they generally got pretty good grades, but they had sort of a variety of tactics to do that, right? And so some of them were like, I always go to class. I turn in every assignment.
Lame.
But maybe I'm texting through class when it gets boring. Or maybe I don't take notes if I can find them all on the online course material. Or maybe I had other students who like, I'm not going to class if I'm not going to learn anything, but I'm sure to do X, Y, or Z. And so what I found mostly was that high achieving students had consistent and predictable ways of managing their engagement. And so they had developed sort of, I called them behavioral predictors of like, this is the minimum I'm always going to engage. I'm always going to do X because that's my standard. And then the variable component was the teacher, right? If it was a good teacher and they lectured well, and I felt like this material was going to apply to my future was a big one, that the material was well presented and it couldn't be accessed anywhere else. when students sort of were noticing those different things, it would cause deeper cognitive engagement beyond just those behaviors of like, well, I show up, well, I turn in the assignments, well, this is just what I do because of my own personal value system. It was that deepening of engagement was sort of contextual, which I found interesting.
Interesting.
That is really cool.
I guess I have a question in regards to the current atmosphere that we're in. So, like, I guess applying what you found in your dissertation, do you feel like with COVID and everyone, do like telework or doing school virtually, do you think that's going to be something that will be sustainable in the future? Like, I guess, do you feel like we have to have a physical classroom?
Good question. It's difficult to separate, my own gut feeling, right? And sort of what my research would tell me. My gut tells me, yes, we need a physical classroom because I think people are inherently relational. And I think even in my study, I found that so many of my participants were very hesitant to sort of like out their professors. Well, he's a really good person. Well, he tries really hard. Well, she was excited. She might not have been organized, but she was really enthusiastic. And so I think that human connection is what drove a lot of the motivation to, like, seeing your professor as a human, I think does impact your willingness to engage with them. So in that sense, I think my research would tell me that we do need that sort of human connection. And I think that's really difficult to achieve online. I think things like Zoom and video calls do better than just a straight online class where you're never seeing a face, but, working with peers, a lot of like evidence-based practices or sort of, what we would encourage teachers to be doing in their classroom would say that students need to work together, that high-achieving students need to explain concepts to low-achieving students, that the idea of like cooperative learning is way better than just rote learning to like pass a test. And so I think there will always be a need for a classroom.
Okay. So what does it mean for me if I am very open to out a professor?
I was going to bring up a very similar point. Hey, I don't think you ever interviewed me, Ally.
I was going to say, Ally, is there something wrong with us?
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist. No, I think that I think the education system, we all sort of, the longer you're in it, the more you realize it favors a particular personality type. Knowing you and Cole both pretty well, I think you both exhibit a sort of different personality type than your sort of typical high-achieving academic sort. I think that students who buy into the school entity, or just this is what academia is and so this is what I do, have to sort of find a reason to do that. We're very rational beings, generally speaking, and so we have to sort of create a reason, even though one doesn't really exist, of like why you should go to class. What I see in both you and Cole is that you don't find the need to create that reason to go to class because you're not deeply invested in the academic system. That would be my observation. I don't know, but
no, that seems reasonable. Some people just would go to class because that's like what you're paying to go to class, and you're told to go to class, and that's what they say is where you learn. So that's what I do, with no logical reason. And Jake and I were really looking for that. Like, if it doesn't help me get a piece of paper in 4 years, I'm not going.
Well, I guess I just never understood the person who like never questioned it. Like, I felt like I knew people in college where it was like, wait, you don't have to go? Like, it was like something that mentally never occurred to them that there was another option. I don't know.
One of the things I tried to write about in my paper that I wasn't really able to fully flesh out, but I would love to do more research on someday. Well, maybe not love, but I am interested in,
I could stand.
Is I think typically people develop what I would call efficient or streamlined engagement practices. And so nobody wants to wake up every morning and decide, well, should I think really hard in this class today or should I not? Should I attend this class or should I not? Should I turn in my homework or should I not? You develop a sort of system for yourself, right? And you apply that as you go into every new context, because you don't want to, every day can't be a brand new day. And so those people that you're talking about that never even considered not going to class, it's because they have developed this sort of system of, to succeed, I do X, Y, and Z. And it's worked for me for this long, so I just continue to do it. You and Cole developed a system of, I go to class on X number of days, I work with Jake every night to complete this amount of homework. You developed a system, right, to sort of efficiently accomplish what you determined to be success. And so for every person that might look a little bit different, but I think people do ultimately rely on their behaviors that have worked for them in the past.
This is very interesting to think about.
Yeah, that is a really interesting concept. And I would say it probably did hold water, because you did have the people that went to class, and then some people didn't go to class, and then some people encouraged other people not to go to class, and we all made her through a different way.
And it's really when those behaviors start failing you that you look at them differently. I was a studier my first probably year and a half of college, and I would study, and I would be one of those kids who stayed up all night and stressed about my tests, and one day I failed a test when I was in college, which, I had been super successful up until that point, and it was this whole identity crisis. And I have this vivid memory of, I was in mechanics of materials, and I hung out with friends, not studying, the whole night before, because I was like, I am so tired of studying and failing. It's not worth it to me anymore. That strategy wasn't working for me anymore. And I went in and I got 100% on the test that I didn't study for.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
And I was like,
wow.
I'm never studying again. And I never did, because that strategy failed. Yeah, that strategy failed me. The studying and staying up all night failed me. And then I found this new strategy that didn't fail me. And it was, I'm not going to study. I know that if I walk into a test and tell myself, I know this material and I'm here to just show it, and my grades and my stress went way down and my grades went way up when I stopped studying.
Oh.
And it became this new strategy that worked for me. And so I think if I had never had that reckoning, I probably would have been staying up all night all through college, because I would have thought that was what was keeping me successful, even if it wasn't.
Just one more hour of study will get me there. Huh.
Right.
I think Jake and I probably went through a very similar process. I remember studying quite a bit harder probably for chemistry tests than I did for some of my upper level course tests and stuff. And I didn't start skipping class on what I would consider a regular basis till second semester sophomore year. I had gone to class consistently, right. But then at one point I was not doing well on the tests, and I was going to class and homework was taking me as long, and I was like, what am I doing? I'd just rather start the homework. I have no better idea how to do the homework after class as I did before. And so that's kind of what, it was physics too, to be honest, with everybody.
That going to class strategy failed you because you went and you didn't learn anything. So why go? If that strategy, if you perceived it to be failing you, then you're going to reevaluate. But for the students who never perceived that it was failing them, if they could create a perception that, oh, I'm getting something out of it, because I'm sure you talk to those people, they thought that they were getting something out of it, even if you could tell that they weren't. They thought, well, but maybe there's some little magic dust in the air if I go sit there.
Well, okay, I guess now that we're talking about this, it's making me really think about a lot of situations. Because, I feel like Cole and I, we went through, we go to class, we do the homework, we take the test, we'd study, and then eventually we realized at some point, all right, we would study so much, but it didn't matter, or we go to class so much and it didn't matter. But I feel like I also knew people on the reverse end who kept studying, kept going to class, wouldn't miss anything, would keep failing the test, but wouldn't change anything. Would just keep hammering down. And so, like what's going on with their thought process of everything I'm doing is failing me, why do I keep doing it? Or are they just not?
Good
I don't
question. Without interviewing them, it would be hard to make a real evaluation. Right. But one guess would be that they aren't linking their strategies to their failures. They think, well, the strategy is what's getting me X far. If I just did one more thing on top of it, that's what I need. They're not saying, wait, clearly the strategy's failing me. They're thinking, I need to do more on top of what I'm already doing. And I think that's probably a lot comes down to personality, right? I'm a critical person by nature. So I would never think, I shouldn't say never, but my nature would not be to think, well, I'm doing this thing and it's not working, but maybe if I just did it more, like, that seems risky.
I think it also depends what you think of yourself. If you think of yourself as somebody that well, if it takes everybody 10 hours to study, it's going to take me 20. Whereas I think you and I, Jake, probably went in with the attitude a little bit more like, well, if somebody else is doing this in 3 hours, I'm doing something wrong. It's taking me more time. Like, if they can pass the test, I can pass the test. And so I was always looking for a way to make it easier. Like, I'm not going to pretend I wanted it to be as easy as possible.
Cole, what was our motto at the end? If you wait to the last minute, it only takes a minute.
Yes, that was our motto.
Allie, you're just making me think about things in a whole new light right now.
Well, this is the most interested someone's been in my dissertation work in a hot minute, so...
Well, so can anyone... I guess I asked Zach the same thing. Could, anyone request to, read your dissertation, or is it they have to go through Oregon State to get that?
That's a good question. Academic research is always a little bit weird to is often weird to access. Typically, I have a bone to pick with journal publishing companies, so when your podcast
just flesh it out right now.
You're allowed to say it. Nope.
I'm saying it, but when I make it big, they're gonna hear it from me. No, just kidding. So the weird thing is, so I do all this work, right? Well, first of all, the government funds research, and I heard it described in grad school, and I think this is a pretty accurate. The government sort of takes a shotgun approach to research. They just shoot a shotgun at the wall, and hopefully a few things hit the target and really move the country forward. But there's a lot of sort of just scattered bullets to the side. So,
off target ammo, we'll say.
Yes. And so the government, how the process works is you write a grant to a division of the government. There's some privately funded research, but typically within STEM, it's funded under NSF or other government entities. And so then they give out money to an institution like Oregon State and my boss. Oregon State takes a huge cut. Research institutions take a big old chunk right off the top, bunch of money.
Is it 80%? Or
I think it's close to 50%.
Okay.
Which, in and of itself, is very dysfunctional because, as you can imagine, so the project that I worked on was an $800,000 grant. And for Oregon State to take a huge $400,000 cut of that feels real nice to them. You, as a lowly student paying what feels like a lot of money to you, is ultimately not that important to them. Their research becomes a lot more valuable to them than their students, which creates kind of this weird dichotomy at research universities. But that's another story. So the money comes in, my boss gets money, and then my boss pays me and manages me to sort of do this project. I conduct all the research, I analyze it all, I write it all. I'm on a team. They do some work too. They revise my writing. Lots and lots and lots of hours, years of work. You submit it to a journal. They light it on fire and say you suck, and then you fix it, and it's just this whole thing. It's a great experience. You have low self-confidence, it really boosts you up.
I was going to say, it's really uplifting.
Yeah. Very, very. And then, finally, you get an email one day and say, we are willing to publish your work for the unbelievable bargain of $2,000. You can pay us to publish your work. Which I think is just a little crazy because they're getting my work.
Sounds like an institution like ABET. Like, hey, we're gonna sell your work and you're gonna pay to give it to us. We're gonna burn the candle at both ends to make all the money just because we are who we are.
Yep, it's a very similar situation. So yeah, you pay them a couple $1,000 and they, after much sweat and tears, accept your article and they published it. And then, generally speaking, that journal goes right back to the university that paid for the research in the whole first place. And they say, once I give them journal, once I pay them to publish my paper, I don't own it anymore. So it's not mine. I can't give it to anybody. I can't, I would be copywriting it. Yeah, they own the copyright.
What the heck? I feel like so you do all this work and pay them to take it from you.
Yep. And then they go to the university and they say, if you want to read the work that your own people have published, you have to pay us thousands and millions, in some cases, millions of dollars to read it.
That is a bigger correct than ABET. Jake and I need to start.
Yeah, I was going to say, they're getting money on all ends of this deal.
Oh, yeah,
holy cow.
There's been some big universities, I think. You guys need to fact check. I think Cal Poly, maybe, or there was a big school in California. I don't know, Caltech. I don't know. One of those big schools in California didn't pay to the. Then the little journals all form like a big conglomerate, and then they sell to the universities in a big package. And it was like they were charging these universities like a couple $1 million a year, and the university just said, "Screw you!" Because it's a monopoly, right? They set the prices. Nobody can say, "Oh, we just don't want access to the top tier journals," but this university did, and so in response to that, there is a push towards what is called open access journals, in which you still pay to publish in the journal, but then they're free to access by anyone. So I actually think all of my publications are in open access journals. I submitted to a not open access journal and they rejected me, so their loss.
Yeah,
so
it is their
each
loss.
Different journal you have to submit to, and then they get to decide if they'll publish you or not.
Yeah, so the process looks like they each have little formats and criteria, and you follow all their little rules, and then you submit. It's a whole big process, and you write a little letter begging them to consider you, lowly you.
Such a messed up process.
It's a racket. Anyway, so you submit to the journal, and then it's usually a quick review would be 3 months, but sometimes longer. So it goes through an editor, oftentimes an associate editor, and then a couple of reviewers, usually 2 to 3 reviewers. And so when you get it back, you have between 3 to 5 commentaries on your manuscript. I have had as many as 10 pages of commentary on my manuscripts of all the things that they want you to change. And so then you diligently spend hundreds of hours addressing all those changes. So the first journal I submitted to, 10 pages of comments. I collected a whole other round of data, spent 6 months revising my paper. They give you a time limit on how long they'd like to see it. You revise, and then you resubmit. And then oftentimes they send it out to 1 or 2 of the same reviewers and then get a new reviewer or 2, which is always such a crapshoot because this new reviewer might have a totally different set of issues than the first reviewer did, which was the case with my paper. And so then it ultimately, that's called the peer review process. I'm sure you've heard the term peer review journals. So anyway, it's just kind of a crapshoot who you get to review your paper. And, I've done some reviewing, and it is really hard because there's this weird, I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours thinking about this very sort of niche topic. And then you get some person who like has some familiarity with the topic, but they pick one thing and they kind of hone in on it and they get all like, oh, but you did, da-da-da-da-da, and I hate this so much. And so it creates this weird system where these people have a lot of power, but not necessarily a lot of background or knowledge in like maybe the exact statistical analysis that you used, or maybe the construct you were researching. So anyway, then they give you a lot of comments, you try to address those, and then you resubmit, and then after you resubmit, they can say, well, you tried, but it wasn't good enough, which is the case with me. So that was a year-long process between the review, the revision, then another review. So then you're just up a creek, and you go to the next journal, you go again, and then
wait, Ally, I guess... when they're reviewing this, are they like telling you to change your research, or what are they telling you?
Well, if they're jerks, they tell you to change your methods, which like I always find that to be incredibly frustrating, and they really shouldn't. Like a good reviewer would not say, "Oh, redo your methods." Well, they're done, dingus, or else why would I be here? A lot of times. Man, how do I get into this without getting too far in the weeds? So like for my survey that I developed, I did a bunch of different statistical tests to sort of make sure those items I was saying, remember how I was saying that they needed to sort of be the same? You have to prove that statistically. So I did a certain number of tests, but then of course you get a reviewer who their like favorite test is kurtosis or some weird thing, and then they're like, well, you didn't test for kurtosis or skewedness or this or that, and well, now the whole thing is in jeopardy. And so then you just have to run that test and find a way to like meaningfully integrate that into your paper. And then you have a different reviewer who's like, well, your alpha was only 0.7 and the literature says they should be 0.8, so what does that say about the whole system? And you have to sort of justify, well, it's not perfect, but like it still might be meaningful to somebody, even if it's not 100% perfect. So it's a lot of like justifying what you did do while also like making accommodations for what they asked for.
Wow. Ally, you're stronger than me. There's no way I could. I would just be like, all right, well, you're right. It's 0.7 versus 0.8. You're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. It's one thing that I think is really hard in academia that I think it's one reason that women are less frequently in sort of STEM fields is it's just like, it's very brutal. It's like, well, because it feels really personal, right? You've spent all this time on this thing and it can feel like you, which is obviously a problem if you're putting your worth and identity in something you do, but it's easy to do and it's very isolating because literally nobody else in the world knows what you're doing. You're doing it 100% by yourself, right? Typically. And so it feels super personal when someone says, well, what were you thinking? And you've been thinking about this for possibly like 2 to 3 years. And for someone to say like, well, what do you mean? Like, how long did you spend reading this? Like 45 minutes? Like, you can feel really defensive. You can feel very, dumb. Like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, you don't understand. Like, I did try. I don't know. It wasn't stupid. I promise.
I did my best.
Yeah. But, you have to just learn to not take it as personal. And once you learn that it's sort of part of the system and part of, it's part of your job ultimately to sort of field those things, to sort of like process those things and just spend time thinking about them. My job is very like intellectually burdensome. It's a lot of like processing. Okay, what should I do about that? And if you can kind of accept that as your job, then you just sort of keep rolling.
Okay. I don't know. This is just, I don't think I could ever do it.
No.
Am
I giving you the juicy deets that Zach left out?
Yeah, like Zach so just better. Breezed over all of this. Zach was like, oh yeah, you write the paper and they approve it and then that's that.
Classic male versus female. And I think, and to be fair, I think there are people that feel that way. You know, when Zach got and it's cultural, there's so many things. Every field within STEM is totally different. So Zach published in transportation journals, and he had the same thing. He had some reviewers who were like, well, but what about this stat? And so he just ran the stats and included them. In education, it's a little bit more personal sometimes because it's qualitative, and qualitative is inherently less objective. There's just less numbers. But you're dealing with engineers doing qualitative data. And so you have these people who want facts, but it's inherent. Like if I do an interview with you, there's no numbers, there's no facts, so to speak. And so you have to establish reliability and validity is the terms we typically use in a qualitative study. And so that looks a little bit different, and there's a lot more sort of opinion and nuance to that. And so I think it is a little bit different in engineering education versus like Zach's field being a little bit more technical. But yeah, I think also Zach just doesn't take it as personal. He's like, well, that was dumb that they wanted this, but I guess we'll just do it anyway. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'd be having like a 3-day cry over that, but okay.
Oh, goodness.
So, all right, so you write these journals, go through this review process, finally you get approved, and then I guess at what point do you defend your dissertation? Is it
long before they're approved?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yes, thankfully.
Silly you, Jake.
Well, the review process is long, as you may have noticed. And if you get rejected, then... So also, okay, not everybody writes journal articles from their dissertation, which is a little bit confusing. It depends on your advisor. It depends on, like, there's 2 styles of dissertation manuscripts. You can do, I'm not going to remember the names, but sort of a compilation of journal articles, or you can just do one big, long ramble on your dissertation topic. Some people, I would never do this, but there are people who are funded under one research program. So like basically they're paid to do this analysis or that analysis or write this paper, but then they do their dissertation on sort of something they're personally very interested in. And so it's like their side hustle kind of. And in that case, you wouldn't necessarily have to publish that at all. Typically your advisor wants you to publish because in order to get more money, they have to sort of prove to the NSF that they're like doing things with the money that they've already had. And so, and them getting promoted is sort of based on how many papers they write. And so it's in your advisor's best interest for you to keep publishing. And so I had a pretty good advisor in that sense. He was very efficient, which helped us get along well because I'm very efficiency minded. And so he's like, the requirements to get a PhD are very vague. And so my advisor said, if you have 3 journal articles submitted to a journal, nobody's going to tell you can't graduate. I did my PhD really quickly. I spent like 2.5 years. And a lot of people would spend like 4 to 7. So I did mine really quickly. But if you get in front of your committee and you say, like, here's my 3 articles, and they're all being reviewed in a journal, they're not necessarily being accepted, but they're, like, at the point that I felt comfortable submitting them, that typically looks pretty good. So I submitted all of my journal articles. None of them were published. One of them was in second round of reviews, but that's the one that ended up getting rejected. And so I defended and then resubmitted all of my articles, like revised all my articles, resubmitted them all. And then just this week, so I defended in September, and just this week I got word that my last article is accepted with revised for editors only. So I still have to revise it, but it doesn't have to get sent out for review again.
So I guess my question is, do you actually get your PhD once you defend your dissertation?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a requirement that you have these publications?
Nope. Don't have to have publications. The sort of driving force in publications is typically if you are working in a university faculty job, Your tenure and promotion is what they call it. Your ability to have job security is based on how much you publish. And so the more you publish, the more money you can get in grants, and then the more grants you can get, the more you can keep publishing. And if you publish enough, then you can get promoted. And tenure is the sort of controversial, you can never get fired.
Yeah, the holy
package.
Grail.
Yeah. So,
that is the one everybody wants.
Yeah, so people usually spend the first 5 years of their career sort of frantically publishing and getting money. Because I think the typical-ish tenure situation is you have to graduate at least one graduate student, or a graduate student or two. You have to bring in $1 million in funding typically, and you have to publish 10 journal articles in 5-ish years.
It seems like such a vicious cycle of like goals to meet.
It's vicious. Yeah, and
like you alluded to earlier, Allie, nowhere in there was like teach a good class to the poor undergraduates that are all engineers and building buildings people live in. Like, they don't care about that.
Yeah, very, very weird. There is usually a component of your like teaching and evaluation scores. So those like end of course evaluations that you fill out for your teachers, they do like matter-ish. But ultimately, the part that's kind of sad, like I said, if you have brought in, like if you bring in a little extra money, but your evaluations are a little crappy, they're probably still going to teach you, or they're probably still going to tenure you. You know, it's unlikely for you to get fired because you were a bad teacher.
Interesting. So I guess I have a question. Like, with this such a vicious cycle of publish, how much information out there is just useless?
You know, it useless to who? You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
It's not useless for the next person that's trying to publish. And unfortunately, that's what it is. A lot of times you're just building, they sometimes call it the ivory tower. Like, you're just building like this sort of like castle of your own all by yourself. And you're very isolated from like the real world or what happens in everyday life, because it becomes sort of self-fulfilling, which is really unattractive to me, which is part of why I'm not really pursuing a career in academia. But I think that shotgun approach that I was talking about, there are things that do matter. They're just gradual, and it's just not all of it. You know, so like engineering education generally has moved the engineering discipline away from weed out classes. So it used to be like if you went to a big university and you took physics and calculus and whatever, maybe even statics your first year or two, they would be so hard to try to get you to fail. Like, that was just the model. And then it was like, okay, well, if you survive that, then you're going to be a good engineer. And, you know, through engineering education research, they've said, like, actually what you do is you just get a lot of the same type of people in engineering, and it doesn't necessarily make good engineers. It makes engineers who are good at one specific type of thing, and that's not what we need in the engineering discipline. And so how can we restructure these classes so we get a more diverse group of people who are willing and interested to pursue engineering? And so I think like that is valuable and meaningful. But, you know, does my journal article contribute to that change? Like, maybe in a like very fractional way, but it's very slow and not like, oh, I published this study and now the world's different.
Gotcha. So it's a very slow movement of the needle. It's not like a drastic, oh, new discovery.
Correct. In most cases. You know, there's the occasional, like, you know, the people who are now, there's tons of money, as you might guess, being dumped into coronavirus research. And so there will be people who do research that matters for like finding a vaccine, for finding how it spreads, for finding different things like that. And, you know, the person before that who figured out how to like multiply bacteria in a petri dish might not have felt like their research was really cool, but now those people who are doing coronavirus research are relying on that method that they developed. And so it does sort of build on itself, and it is what keeps America at the forefront of like sort of STEM globally. So you can't do away with research entirely, but it's hard. There's like really good pieces and really bad pieces, and there's not a lot of external sort of checks on, hey, is this a good and efficient use of resources?
Yeah. I feel like we're going to have to talk to Zach. He's just skipped over a lot of crucial details, I feel like.
All the critical details. Well, Zach was heading out of it, so I guess maybe we could switch into what you've been doing. I guess to clear up for the listeners, you were fully funded, as Zach mentioned. Most STEM research is funded, and so you were receiving a paycheck, correct, Ally?
Yeah, that is ultimately, to backtrack a little, why I ended up going to graduate school. I never loved engineering, and I was sort of disillusioned with, like, how did I get a degree that I was not at all interested in? And I think part of that is the onus is on engineering educators to sort of better prepare engineering students for what careers they're possibly going to encounter. Like, I just didn't really realize, like, I'm going to be sitting drawing lines in AutoCAD all day, every day. Or, alternately, I didn't have a lot of engineering faculty explaining to me what jobs I could do that weren't that. And I knew I did not want to do that. And so, I kind of realized that late in the game, and I was already most of the way through my engineering program at that point. And so, I fell in love with teaching, and I still really like teaching. And so I thought, I could be a professor. So went to graduate school, got paid. Not only they pay for the schooling itself, and then I got a paycheck on top of that, a pretty small, I think I was making like $27,000 a year, with full benefits, which isn't great, but it's not the worst. And so I did that for like right around 3 years, got married, which sort of changed the trajectory of my career and what I was potentially interested in. Because I would have probably pursued teaching at like a teaching college similar to LeTourneau, but being married, I am looking for a career that's more flexible around what my husband wants to do. And as you all know, he's working here in Sholo, and so currently, when I finished my PhD up in September, and now I am what's called a postdoctoral scholar. So just when you thought there was no more education you could get, there's more, folks.
Oh, so we have a new officially most educated guest on what no one told us.
Seriously.
Beating Zach out.
Dethrone Zach.
Yeah, I would say I could dethrone him. But I think this is more. Yeah. So we had a postdoc, and I had never heard of it. I don't think most have. But until I was in graduate school, and I was like, what is a postdoc? And it's like, someone was like, well, it's basically just like being a graduate student, but you've like already got your PhD. And I'm like, who in the hell does that? And alas, here I am.
Here we are.
Met my boss on the internet. Just like, I was looking at an article that one of her colleagues published, and he was like, hey, if you want to chat about my article, I'll talk to you about it. And I was like, dang, this seems like a good professional networking thing to do, so I guess I'll do it. Called him, and he's like, I have a friend who's looking for a postdoc. And I said, well, I was like, I had all these stipulations, like I'd have to be able to work remote, you'd have to hold the position for me for 6 months, yada, yada, yada. And she said, all right. And so I started that job in beginning of November. So I've been at it 6-7 months now. And I do a lot of the same work of just doing research and stuff like that. It's a little bit different than being a graduate student. There's a little bit less pressure, but it is similar.
I'm assuming the paycheck's hopefully a little more?
Paycheck is better. I make, I think, right around $48,000 a year, and I have full benefits. And universities often have good benefits because they're big
right
corporations and generally healthy populations, I think you usually get good benefits when you have a relatively healthy.
Yeah, it's cheaper for the company as a whole if they have a crap ton of grad students that are not going to have major medical expenses most likely in the next 4 years.
Exactly. Everybody's relatively young, usually low risk takers type of people. So they look at those factors when they determine insurance. And so, good insurance. And postdocs typically, for those of you out there interested in getting a postdoc, they are usually sort of like jumping board positions. Like, you would get this job to publish a lot, so then you would be more attractive to a university to hire you because they're like, oh, she's going to bring in a lot of money. And so that's often how you get hired. So typically people who get postdocs are people who couldn't find faculty jobs or people who are worried about having enough research experience before having a faculty job. So they're very temporary. They're only year-long contracts. And most universities have like a limit that you can only be a postdoc for like 4 or 5 years. So it's not a long-term gig.
Okay.
I was going to say, that was my next question. I was wondering if you could potentially be a postdoc for life.
Nope. Not a lifer.
Nope. Not a lifer postdoc. So are you, would you be currently working on a new paper to publish then? Or what is your kind of current job role?
Yep. Working on, I'm on another NSF, National Science Foundation funded project that I think we're hoping to get 3 papers out of. I don't know that I'll see them all to completion, but my boss extended my contract, so I'm going to be on the project for 2 years. So we'll probably get pretty close to those 3 papers. I don't think they'll all be published, but they should all be in review by the time I'm finished. So, 3 more papers, which is good.
So how does, I guess, working remote in this situation work? Do you, meet up with your, I guess, professor or boss? Advisor weekly, or is it, every 2 weeks, or, I mean, daily, maybe? I don't know.
Good question. I really think it would... First of all, most postdocs would not be remote. A lot of research you need to be on location to do. Fortunately, my situation just has allowed me to do it remotely. I meet with my boss fairly infrequently. She's not super hands-on, and a lot of times, so how it works frequently is faculty get hired, then they get what's called startup money. The university gives you money to hire a bunch of students, and a lot of times they hire postdocs to help them write grants or to publish a bunch of papers so they can get their tenure. So my advisor is relatively new in her career, and so she's very busy. Faculty are always most busy in those first 5 years before they have tenure. Maybe not always, but typically. And so she's pretty busy.
They could get fired, so they have to work a little harder.
Yeah, yes. And it is kind of like Jake was saying, they call it the publish or perish model. It's very much go, more papers, because the line is really ambiguous. Well, if you have 10 papers, we'll think about it. It just is kind of weirdly the in crowd will judge you now. So it is kind of stressful situation. So she does that. But I meet up with her every week or every other week. And then, I'm on a project team. So there's another graduate student who's working on his PhD, and we actually have an undergraduate who's volunteering on our project. And I meet up with them 3 times a week. And, we do we just finished some data analysis, and we're starting writing tomorrow. So, doing some writing here pretty soon.
Cool. And then what are you researching currently?
Oh, good question. Researching faculty peer mentorship. So, NSF has dedicated a lot of money to transitioning faculty who already do engineering research. So they might already be tenured in engineering, but they're interested in engineering education and they want to start pursuing research in that. And so they've created this program where a mentor who's been trained in engineering education, so typically they'd be younger, right, because it's a pretty young discipline, is going to mentor this faculty who's already established. And so it's kind of a unique mentorship relationship because the mentee is typically senior, in the sense of like they're higher up in the academic ranks than their mentor. So it creates like these kind of unique power dynamics. And so I'm doing some research on what makes those relationships successful and how we can sort of, the like overall goal of the project is to sort of build a network that can sort of successfully integrate new people into engineering education, because getting kind of like diverse voices is always important, especially in newer fields.
Mm-hmm.
This is really just blowing my mind. This whole research, the approval process. Like, I feel, I don't know, just very, I don't know how I feel now.
It's a different world.
It is. Do you get any more letters behind your name if you do a postdoc?
You don't. No more letters. I think I'm done with letters.
That's a bummer.
Well, still.
That's what Jake and I are pursuing.
Dr. Barlow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's all right. I was hoping to be Dr. Ironside. I feel like that sounds pretty legit. But,
all right. This is
marriage.
Also another question I have. Like when they introduce you and Zach, is it Mr. and Mrs. Dr. Barlow, or is it Doctors Barlow?
I believe it is the Doctors Barlow.
The Doctors Barlow. Okay.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we got a return stamp that says the Doctors Barlow. So.
Oh, wow, look at you.
We thought we might as well use it for something. I don't know what we're going to use these PhDs for, but return stamps are a pretty good option.
So one of the other, like you brought up, you were doing your undergrad and then you realized towards the end your civil engineering wasn't really, I guess, what you were, interested in heavily, at least doing AutoCAD, that portion of it. I kind of wanted to know, like before that, like high school, why did you go to school for engineering? Or what made you think engineering was right for you?
I have this theory, another thing I'd like to research potentially someday. I think often women who go into engineering, either have a strong male influence in their life that is an engineer, like a dad or an uncle or a coach or somebody like that who they sort of admire. And often the women who go into engineering that I've observed are really good at school. And I fell into both those categories. For the record, none of that's proven. That's just my own perception. I was very academically gifted. I loved math. I loved calculus. I still love calculus. And
I'm glad someone does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
somebody has to.
And I think there is a misconception, right, that engineering is math. And so I was very interested in doing math. And even when I took calculus in college, I loved it. And so I thought that would make me a good engineer. And little did I know that engineers use math to understand engineering principles, but engineering itself is not heavily reliant on doing a lot of math. And so I felt really confused because I liked the sort of black and white, right answers, here's the process, this is how you do it. And engineering is a lot more nuanced than that, in that you are designing things and there's not really a black and white solution oftentimes. And I was just really not prepared for that, for one thing. And it just didn't interest me. Like, I didn't get excited about the idea of like, I wonder how big this pipe should be. I guess I'll just make it a little bigger than I think it should be and it'll be fine. Like, it just... and I look at my dad, and my dad really does get excited about that. He's like, I could save my client money. I could make this, instead of a 6-inch pipe, I could make it a 4-inch pipe with an expander right here. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool for something. It never, like, I felt way more excited about calculus, frankly. So, Yeah, it never got me excited. And I'm pretty relational, and so I liked the idea of teaching and just building relationships. That felt like a better fit to me. And I think there are jobs, this is a roundabout answer to your question, but I think there are jobs within civil engineering that I would have liked. And I wish that I had had better exposure to, like, you know, what does it take to be in, like, engineering marketing? How do you sort of find yourself in a career that you could like as a more relational engineer? Because I think it's super important that we don't only have people who love pipe diameters designing the entire, like, physical world that we live in, you know? That's
right.
That is deeply relational and deeply personal to all of us, but often we very task-oriented people with those jobs. And so I think there's a lot of room and space for that, but females leave the engineering field at a rapid rate, in part because of, I think, the lack of the ability to be relational in their career. And then also I think it's really hard to be in a career that's not flexible with, like, having kids and raising a family and, like, sort of changing family needs. And so I think engineering could do a better job of figuring out what it would look like to have, you know, different voices in the design space. But I just, at this point, didn't see how I'd fit in that necessarily.
So I guess one of my questions in regards to, like, female engineers going into the engineering space, do you feel like there's a more rapid, I guess, dropout because to begin with there's not a lot of female engineers in the engineering space? So if we get to the point where it's like, instead of probably, I don't know, 80-20 to, if we get to like 60-40, then it'll be a rate of less dropout in the engineering space? Or do you feel like it's more, like the family aspect or the relational aspect that you were talking about that is kind of hindering that?
Man, yeah, there's whole fields of research on, like, why there's not as many women. One thing you're sort of alluding to is, like, lack of visibility or representation. You know, when you go at Oregon State, they have every graduate of civil engineering, they have them all lined up on all the walls, which is kind of cool, right? And for, like, the first 50 years of the school or some crazy thing, it's exclusively white men with mustaches, you know? And
you had to have a mustache.
Yeah. And so to walk in, like, the implicit messaging of those things that you don't even really know about is that, like, I don't belong here. Like, oh, I'm a freak. Like, what am I doing in this building? Like, there's no, whereas you go in an education building and there's a bunch of, like, women holding little kids' hands, you know, and if you're a man entering that space, you feel like, I don't think I really belong here. And so there is some of that. A lot of the majority of faculty are men, so there's, like, that sort of representation that you see. There's the, like, peer issues that often emerge of, like, I had this, this is, like, my very vivid memory of being frustrated when I was in college, where I was doing a very, like, hands-on design project, and we were building a water filtration system, and there were a couple of guys on my team, and they were inside running the calculations, and the guy came outside and said, man, it was me and another girl who were building the model, and he said, well, man, I feel like you should be inside running the calculations, and I should be out here building it. I'm like, screw you. Like, why? You know, and he was a very sweet guy. It was nothing, he wasn't malicious.
Right.
But you encounter a lot more things like that as a woman. I remember I was at a grocery store one time, and this guy was like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm an engineer. And he's like, man, you must get so many job offers. And I'm like, wow, because I'm a girl or because you think I'm talented? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And he's like, I just thought all engineers had mustaches. I was like, well, okay. You know, and just stuff like that it's not a huge deal, but I got in my car and cried. And I don't know why, but I felt like I had to defend myself. And he was a super sweet old man. He was trying to make conversation with me, but it was just hard. And so I think women encounter a lot more things like that. There is research that does show that women do have like family issues, like I was talking about. Issues is not the right word, but they have a greater like pull between, well, do I want to raise my kids? And if I want to raise my kids, can I like advance in this company? Probably not. And like, it's not like, you know, at hospitals where there's a lot of female workers, they have like nursing rooms. Well, they don't have those at engineering companies a lot of times. And so, there's just some of like those practical issues, that women face more than men. But there are greater numbers of women, interestingly, in fields like civil, biomedical, and environmental, which have a more sort of social component of like service to the community or different things, whereas like mechanical, electrical, and computer remain the lowest female.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true in biomed. I think when I graduated, I was outnumbered. I think there was 5 girls, and I maybe two of us guys in the biomed graduating class.
Yeah. It's a lot closer to 50-50 in biomed.
Ally,
well, I think that's
opening my mind to all different thoughts right now.
Yeah.
Good.
Do you have any other questions, Jake, or?
Oh, I mean, basically our typical, what do you wish someone at some point in this whole process, or maybe at multiple points, like, was there anything that you were like, man, looking back, I wish I knew this, and that would have really saved me a lot of trouble? Like, only if somebody would have told me this, it would have saved me such a headache.
Don't study.
Yeah, that'd be like the sort of casual answer. I
mean, it could be multiple answers.
You know, I think with my personality, with my particular set of struggles of, you know, I felt gifted when I was in high school. I came to engineering school and just really struggled to find my place. I think the thing that I wish someone had told me is, you know, there is space for you. And like God is going to use your gifts in the space that he's called you to. And I felt really confused about that for a long time. And if I'm honest, I'm still struggling and wrestling with, you know, how do I use the sort of technical knowledge that I have while like applying the relational pieces of myself that really drive me and excite me. And I wish I had had a few more people tell me like there's space for you, and that voice, and that even if it's different, even if it doesn't like feel normal, is an important one in your field.
I think that's a great message, and very encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Ally, I think Jake and I both learned a lot. I hope our listeners get a lot from kind of what the more educational career looks like. We appreciate you coming on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope they got some good information, some tasty tidbits.
Oh no, this was definitely a great interview. Everyone, please subscribe, tune in, and make sure you listen in for next Monday's release.